The visitors are not from another star. They are not aliens. They are you, wearing a face you have not yet grown into. What does a human become after a million years of silence? Close your eyes. Listen to the static between radio stations. That faint hum, that cold frequency, is the same signal drifting through the vacuum where the craft was tracked. A sound older than language, yet somehow familiar. You scan the stars for alien contact, but the call is coming from inside your own timeline. History is a single loop of tape, and something on the far end is bleeding backward into this moment. Right now, as you watch this, that signal is still arriving. Stay, and you will confront the endgame of your own species. P47, P52. Two designations that don't appear in any official taxonomy, not in any military database, not in any peer-reviewed journal, just letters and numbers, cold, clinical, circulating in corners of the internet where pilot testimony bleeds into theoretical physics, where redacted documents sit next to blurred photographs of objects that should not move the way they move. The names are sterile, forgettable, but their meaning is not. P47 allegedly represents a lineage of human descendants from 47,000 years in your future. Not alien, not from another star system. From here, Earth, after 470 centuries of evolution, technology, and survival you cannot model. P52 follows the same logic, but the timeline stretches further. 52,000 years beyond P47's origin. That places P52 roughly 99,000 years ahead of this moment. The theory tries to reconcile two observations that should not coexist. Military pilots report advanced technology, instantaneous acceleration, no visible propulsion, trans-medium travel between air, water, and space without transition. The explanation for it breaks the laws of causality. If these designations hold any truth, then the unidentified craft are not visitors from distant worlds. They are archaeologists, tourists, or something far less kind, time travelers returning to a period in their own evolutionary past, observing the primitive stock from which they descended. You are not meeting strangers. You are being studied by your own bloodline, warped and unrecognizable after a span of time longer than all of recorded human history. The family tree has been violently pruned and grafted onto itself, branches growing backward, roots tangling with their own future limbs. But the theory creates more problems than it solves. If P47 exists 47,000 years ahead, what extinction events, what climate collapses, what evolutionary pressures twisted the human form into something that requires this kind of return? And why would a civilization capable of traversing time need to revisit the 21st century repeatedly, quietly, without ever saying a word? The question hanging over this story is simple enough to ask, but its answer requires accepting that the ground beneath your feet has already been broken once before. Something happened here, not in the distant theaters of space where stars collapse and galaxies collide, but on Earth itself. An event so total, so obliterating, that it didn't just kill a civilization. It split the human evolutionary tree into two incompatible branches. You see humanity as a single species, a coherent lineage stretching back through time. This theory presents it as a shattered remnant, a lineage that broke under pressure you can't yet name. One branch fled downward, into the silence of caves, into the crushing cold of underground voids where sunlight never reached. Isolated, starving for resources. Over generations, thousands of years compressed into evolutionary necessity, they changed. Skin paled to white, eyes enlarged and shifted to blue, adapting to perpetual darkness. Limbs thinned, bodies optimized not for strength, but for survival in spaces where every calorie mattered. The descendants of this branch are what abduction reports describe as grays. White-skinned, blue-eyed, beings whose appearance suggests not alien origin, but Earth's cruelest evolutionary classroom. The second branch stayed above. On a surface scoured by whatever catastrophe had just occurred, they clung to what remained of the old world. They retained the form you'd recognize, taller, more robust, with features closer to modern Scandinavian populations. These became the so-called Nordic aliens, not visitors from another star, refugees from another timeline. But here's where the logic fractures further. If both branches descended from the same catastrophe, why would the underground survivors, who logically should be less technologically advanced, become the ones associated with starfaring technology? The P52 Orions, the beings allegedly capable of interstellar migration, who fled Earth entirely and settled in systems near Orion's belt, before returning to Earth thousands of years later. Right now, as you process this, the question is not whether it happened. The question is, what kind of fire burns hot enough to split a species in two directions? And why would those who escaped into the stars ever choose to come back? You're not being told a story about contact. You're being told a story about return, about descendants who left a dying world, mastered the technologies necessary to survive the void between stars, and then, inexplicably, came back to the primitive Earth they had abandoned. Not as conquerors, not as gods, as something worse, observers, researchers, tourists walking through the wreckage of their own origin, or refugees, fleeing something even darker than the catastrophe that split them in the first place. So you search for evidence. You comb through the footnotes, the citations, the sources for P47 and P52. You find forum posts, Reddit threads, anonymous testimonies referencing other anonymous testimonies, a chain of whispers that dissolves the moment you pull on it. There is no scientific paper, no leaked Pentagon file, no photograph, no radar signature, no physical artifact linking these entities to any documented encounter. Mainstream science does not acknowledge P47. UFO researchers, even those who dedicate their lives to the phenomenon, dismiss it as noise, a modern internet legend, nothing more. The theory relies on rumors, on social media amplification, on the recursive echo of a story told and retold until it feels real. But it is not real. You close the browser tab. You feel relief. It was fiction, a ghost story. You were frightened by something that does not exist. And then, slowly, you realize what the story was actually describing. Not evidence, architecture. The ghost does not need to be real for the house to be haunted. Because the theory is not about proof, it is about plausibility. It is a model, one of many, for why the sky is silent, for why no signal has ever reached you from the stars, for why the only advanced intelligence to visit this planet might be your own descendants, broken and desperate, reaching backward through time. It is a candidate answer to the Fermi paradox, not the answer, but a valid one. The Great Filter, the hypothetical event that prevents civilizations from becoming interstellar, could be anything. Nuclear war, ecological collapse, artificial intelligence, a pandemic you cannot stop, or something quieter, something that does not destroy you, but changes you, strips you of cohesion, scatters you across time and dimension, leaves you functional enough to survive, but not whole enough to thrive. The catastrophe in the theory is not a fantasy. It is a placeholder, a blank space where the real event will be written. In the P47s and P52s, they are not aliens. They are not evidence. They are a thought experiment, a mirror held up to your future, a way of imagining what you might become, not if you fail, but if you succeed just enough to survive your own filter, and not enough to escape it. The story is fiction, but the house it describes, the universe of silent stars, the missing civilizations, the cold probability that something stands between you and the light, is real. You live in it. right now. You've been staring at two futures that never existed. The Greys, the Nordics, P47, P52. Two timelines, two warnings, two visions of what might come. But here's what the architects of this story understood, what the classified committees whispered about in rooms with no windows. These beings were never predictions. They were never evolutionary endpoints charted on some cosmic calendar stretching 40,000 years into the dark. They were inkblots. And you, sitting here right now, in this fragile moment of human history, saw exactly what you needed to see. The gray, sunken eyes, withered frame, sterile and cold, surviving but not living. Every fear you carry about what technology costs, what convenience steals, what screens do to the soul, compressed into a single silent figure with skin like ash. Not a visitor from the future, a mirror held up to the present. The Nordic, tall, radiant, unburdened by decay, ascending beyond flesh into something luminous. Every desperate hope you harbor about transcendence, about escape, about leaving this broken world behind for the stars, crystallized into a being that looks like an angel wearing your face. Not a destination, a wish, a prayer whispered into the void. The entire architecture of P47 and P52 was a psychological projective test, where the inkblot is the entire cosmos. And the answer was always inside you. The question at the start was about them. Two ghosts in the signal, encrypted, silent, locked in an argument across deep time. But that was never the real question. The real question is about you. Right now, you're standing at the same fork in the evolutionary road that birthed P47 and P52. The same technological threshold, the same species-level decision hanging in the unobserved dark, waiting for your present actions to collapse it into one future or the other. You can choose optimization, efficiency, the cold logic of a system that prunes away every redundant emotion, every inefficient dream, every wasteful question that doesn't accelerate survival. P47's future, clean, silent, inevitable. Or you can choose preservation, holding on to the ancient, irrational parts of yourself that make no computational sense, that drain resources, that refuse to be optimized away. P52's future, messy, human, impossibly fragile. The universe will not intervene. It never does. It will watch with the same indifference it showed to the extinction of the dinosaurs, the birth of galaxies, the slow heat death of everything you've ever loved. The story of the ghosts may be fiction, but the choice is not. So when you stare into the deep future, past the collapse of nations, past the death of stars, past the final quantum flicker of organized matter, which ghost looks back at you from the static?